Welcome to another episode of the Vikingology podcast. I'm Thing One, CJ Adrian.
I'm Thing Two, Terry Barnes, and we
I'm
are the
Professor
arts.
Martin Rundqvist of
You have to say
Stockholm,
your
Sweden.
thing. You have to say your Thing Three. We forgot to tell him that.
There's only two in the Cat in the Hat.
Oh, I know. Well, okay. All right.
You could have said, I'm the Cat in the Hat.
That's Sam I am. That's Sam I am. I do not like that Sam I am.
What is that in French? Chapeau? In Spanish, el gato en el sombrero. I remember this song.
Yeah. The Cat in the Hat, le chat dans le chat en chapeau, le chat chapeauté, chapeauté, chapeau. I don't know. I have no idea.
Come on.
French is a weird language.
Welcome to Vikingology. We're back. Yeah, and speaking of back, we have back Martin Rundqvist from Sweden. Where are you? You're in Stockholm, is that right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, right. Where you all turned your clocks back already, and we haven't done that yet in the States until this weekend. So it was good that I was mindful of that, and we all met at the same time. So
it makes for a better podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome back. Last time, let's see, we talked about skull manipulation. And that was very interesting. And then you mentioned that you were I can't remember when that was, but it was earlier this year. And then you mentioned that you were just wrapping up some field work on Gotland and that you would have some things to share. So that's what we're going to do today. Look at some things, some nice pictures. And we'll post, if it's okay with you, we can post the field report. Is that okay? Or
yeah, sure. There's going to be sort of an official link to the museum that has published it too. But I'm always happy to have my PDFs handed around.
Okay, great. Yeah, because it's got some really nice high-res issues and stuff. So lots of archaeology to talk about. Although I have to say, I want to start with this one quote from your book on the mead halls of the Eastern, well, some people will say, what, Gates? I've read from Tom Shippey that it's supposed to be pronounced Yayats. So the G...
My old English is kind of weak.
So anyway, mead halls of Eastern Sweden, I guess, or peoples back then. And but you're talking about this the study of archaeology and some of the challenges in it, and you say to avoid the myopic study of individual sites and finds, archaeologists are forced to study the generalities of the longue durée. But we take heart in the fact that historians can say nothing whatsoever about our prehistoric regions and millennia. And when I read that, I was like, damn, Martin, like, zing to the historians out there. It's like, well, we have
I
our
love
challenge.
history. I wish there were Viking period written sources about mainland Scandinavia. And sadly, there are not. So we got to make do.
Well, maybe that's my own insecurities as a historian then that was coming through there. Because when I read it, I was like, I actually laughed out loud because I was like, I love the wit of that.
Thank you.
But it is, I mean, it definitely, I was even just explaining to my students this week, we're looking at the Viking Age and it's like, well, until Christianity kind of shows up, like you may think of like dinosaurs or something when we say prehistoric, but for historians, the Scandinavians are still prehistoric at this.
That's literally what it means. Do we have locally written written sources, or do we have we not?
Yeah, exactly.
There's graffiti.
There are some runic graffiti. Some of it is even dirty, but I like to say that sort of 1100s and 1200s Sweden is basically just Iron Age chieftains who are sort of shuffled into the light of history just barely, and they're still in this huge fight with each other and behaving like Conan the Barbarian. But we don't really get narrative sources until the 1300s. Really.
Yeah. Well, and then that always presents the age-old question, right, too, then. Is it really reflective of actual stuff, even in part, or is it just reflective of what 13th century people thought those people were like?
We have a very flourishing discipline of 1300s archaeology supplement those differences.
Well, that's good. So, all right, you all were how big is your team or was your team there for this particular project?
Well, this was such a special thing because this is on Gotland, and Gotland is the source of Swedish fears of metal detectors. Because every field in Gotland has a Viking period silver hoard that has been plowed out and is very vulnerable to polluting by detectors. So in the 80s, when the metal detectors started to sort of become available to the public, archaeologists on Gotland were extremely frightened because they realized that we will no longer be able to control what happens to the hoard sites. So some influential people made sure that a set of rules that is useful to protect hoard sites on Gotland were rolled out all across Sweden, which means that Sweden is a developing country in collaboration with the metal detector amateurs because our restrictions are so draconian, really. And maybe I should emphasize that most of Sweden, very sadly, has not got these signatures. So it's kind of pointless to have a set of rules that is designed to protect those in 24 of 25 Swedish provinces. Anyway, this fieldwork with 11 detectorists is the first time that the museum in Visby on Gotland has invited a metal detector association to come and do a pro bono fieldwork on Gotland. So instead of fearing the scary detectorists and treating them all as crooks, they were invited to my good offices. So we spent 3 days in the field. The sun was shining. This was in April, and this was sort of a hand-picked band of sisters and brothers from the big Swedish Metal Detector Association, and they were very conscious of that this was a momentous event. So they really put in all their best work. And I have never been on such a rich site. This was just crazy.
So how did
11
you
people.
find out about? I mean, how did the site get picked?
Well, in 1841, the people of this small hamlet in central Gotland started sending fines in to the authorities and saying, yeah, every time we dig our potato patch, we find these weird things, and we have realized that we are supposed to hand them in for a finder's fee to the authorities. And they kept doing this up until slightly after the First World War, I think. So for like 80 years, this family kept sending stuff. Yeah, we found some more of this stuff, we found some more. And it was extremely hard to interpret because almost everything they found was from around the year AD 500, and most of it was broken and burned neck rings of bronze.
Wow.
So not gold, not silver, but a copper alloy. And these things had been destroyed. So the people at this site that is now an agricultural hamlet have been destroying like hundreds of neck rings made from base metals during apparently quite a short period, around 500. And archaeology just couldn't deal with this and find any kind of parallel. My colleagues just interpreted this as this must be a bar. And they have been sacrificing neck rings in the bard, which we know that they always do during the period, to communicate with the gods. And this turned out not to be true because this is actually a very long-lived farmstead or hamlet with a couple of farmsteads in it. It's basically been there from around 8150 and it's still there today. There's still a family there who practice agriculture and are very interested in archaeology and are super nice to deal with.
Wow. So I'm going to share the screen because you've got some images, really great images in the field report, so that people can kind of get a sense of some of the stuff at least, and then they can, we'll post to the field report in the show notes, and then they can look at the rest of it on their own. Let's see here. We also have a previous podcast episode with Octavia Randolph, who's an American author who lives in Gotland. She's lived there since the late 90s. And if people want to know more about Gotland in general, I mean, she's kind of an ambassador for Gotland.
Mhm.
Well, that's great. Maybe we should say
Yeah.
that this is one of the big limestone islands in the Baltic Sea, and it belongs currently to Sweden, but this has fluctuated over time.
Yeah. And so if for all of you all out there who are just listening to this podcast, you might want to go to our Substack and take a look at the video so that you can enjoy these images and see these finds. It's pretty amazing. But just so I wanted to start with this so you can explain maybe a bit about what we're looking at here in the site.
Yeah. So the first thing to note is that there's a grid here, the tiny gray dots. Those are 50-meter squares. So what's that in feet? I don't know. It's like 150 feet square.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a big field, and everything the family has collected seems to have been collected in their garden at the southern end, the lower end of this map, where there's woods and lawns. But we ran around in the plowed fields before the crop sprouted this spring, and the conditions for method detecting are perfect. And all the blue dots are a Viking period dress ornaments for the ladies and belt decorations for the gents. And the yellow dots are tiny pieces of Arabic silver coins and the tiny balance weights used to weigh the silver. Okay? And I should say this immediately that this, if you spend 3 days with 11 people in a field like this and only find this very small number of silver chips, basically means it's a worthless place to try to loot, because there's very, very few pieces of silver in this field. You have to have 11 people working for 3 days to get this tiny number, whereas a hoard site typically has hundreds, and you can find them in an afternoon. Just to be clear that I do not condone looting, and if anybody wants to loot, this is not a good place to do it. Right?
Yeah.
So the silver and the dress decorations are coeval. They're all from the 800s and 900s. And in the background, you see this red amoeba thing. That's the distribution of finds from the pre-Viking period that we know as the Vendel period.
Here.
So like the 6th century, the 7th century, the 8th century. So it seems that after this awful catastrophe of AD 536, when there was a famine and several years of no crops, the settlement cycle of the farm that has been small for several hundred years, and then it grows again for the Viking period, where we get this enormous number of finds.
Okay, so let's look at some of the objects then. So is the thing in the upper right, is that a dagger of some kind, or what is that?
Yeah, these are the very few objects that are older than AD 150. So forget about the Viking period. This is the left hand square or box is a piece of a late Neolithic copper axe. So before the official start of the Bronze Age, there is a small trade in copper objects and a small production recasting of copper objects in Scandinavia. And this is one of those. So that was a really fun find. It was the only thing from like the time of Stonehenge that we found. And the top right thing that you mentioned is a miniature dagger. You can see the centimeter scale bars on all three objects. So an inch is 2.5 centimeters. Then you can understand how big they are. The dagger is from the early Bronze Age, like 1500 BC.
Oh
And
my
then at the
gosh.
bottom right is, we're not quite sure, but we think it may be a piece of a dress pin from the Celtic centuries, the pre-Roman Ireland.
Wow. So the thing on the left, I mean, 'cause, to the untrained eye, I mean, I'd be like, just okay, that's just a rock. I'm not even gonna see, you find that in a
Well,
field, you're like, okay, whatever.
well, if you're holding a metal detector, you would not believe that it's a rock because this
Yeah,
thing will give a big beep. It's
that's it.
large and heavy and
Yeah.
solid, so you will be in no quandary over whether to keep it or not. Of course, when I work with the detectives, they aren't find specialists. Some of them are super good with their favorite Minecraft breeds, but usually they need to show me stuff, and I need to make a spot decision out on the field whether to bring it in or to rebury it, because everything we take in, we have to pay fine conservation fee for, and that's currently like um, $120 per object. So I need to have superhuman self-confidence when I decide, are we going to just throw this thing away or take it in? And I'm glad that I realized that, yes, this is the butt end of a late Neolithic copper axe.
Yeah, people don't realize, and I heard, I always mess up her last name because I'm not a Swedish speaker, but Charlotte Jonsson, Hedensjön Jonsson at the University of Uppsala talk about this in an interview of, just people don't think about it. And I mean, I do, I have to say, because I have a background in museum work, but people think it's so cool to like dig up all this stuff and that, like, let's dig up as much of it as we can. And it's like, yeah, but once you dig it up, you got to do stuff with it. You got to preserve it, care for it. It takes up space. It costs money to do that. So yeah, to your point there, it's more than just the fun of, digging it up out of the ground. Then you got to figure out what to do.
We
Let's see
had
what
a great excavation of a Neolithic seal hunting site a few years ago near Stockholm, and they brought in several metric tons of pottery because these people were making train oil from the seal blubber and leaving just enormous amounts of pottery, and it was all brought in. So now there's some poor museum in Stockholm that has to, in perpetuity, keep track of several metric tons of Neolithic pottery just from this one site.
like, we're all good on pottery shards. You don't need to bring any more. Thanks.
Yeah. One of my
Yeah.
favorite finds in the Stockholm Historical Museum is a lady in the 1970s. She brought in 73 kilos of quartz, the white semi-translucent rock. And she says, "I found this stuff in a quartz quarry, and some of these 73 kilos may have been modified by people." And that's what it says. It says in the catalog. All right, 73 kilos. We don't know, but some of it might be modified. Well, thanks for bringing it in.
Yeah, great. Preserving our human story.
Yep.
So, okay, the color on this to me makes me think: is there copper involved with these objects?
Yeah. Most of the objects we secured during our field work is copper alloy. Very little of it is precious metals, and we don't like to take the iron stuff up at all. The main reason is that plowed fields in Europe are always full of horseshoe nails and normal nails as well. And they're absolutely useless for archaeological purposes because their shape is completely determined by the function. So I can't tell a 2,000-year-old nail apart from a nail made just prior to the First World War after it's been rusting in a field. So that's one reason not to take them in. Another reason is that they're super expensive to preserve. And all of this means that it's better to just ignore. When the detector growls in the base register, like and it farts, then you know that this is not something I need to pick up. But this is copper alloy, so this is really good stuff. And all of this is from what we like to call the migration period. It starts around the attack of the Huns in 375, and it ends with the great ash cloud event in 536, 537. So this period is quite clearly defined. People changed their material culture from these two shocks, or in connection with these shocks. So In the bottom row, in the center, is a sword pommel. It's the thing that sits right next to your hand when you're holding a sword. And this is Beowulf poetry. So this is the sort of stuff that Beowulf finds in Grendel's mom's house in the bog. You know, when he dives down to kill Grendel's mom, the poet describes that she has a watery house where she lives, and it's full of weaponry details, like these sword pommels. And another interesting piece is right to the right of the sword pommel is a large copper alloy ring with a staple to the left that has been inserted into something from wood, and to the right, or pointing upward, is a strap fastener. And I think that this thing, the ring with the two attachment pieces, is either from a saddle, most likely from a saddle, because the woodwork indication might also be from just the strap work around the bridle of the horse. So this is super high status at the time. Very few people ride horses. Very few people own horse gear in the 400s.
So I have a quick question on the dating of these things. So it since it's not organic material, so is there a sediment layer that you're pulling these out of specifically that you're keeping track of, or what's the dating process for these objects, or is it just we're placing them more or less where they belong according to what we already have in the archaeological record?
No, they are entirely dated from typology, and it's thanks to the rich graves of Gotland. So thanks to their burial habits, we have a really good chronology for fashion in jewelry and dress details and weaponry, from starting like 150 BC and ending with Christianization around 1100. So we haven't got a good chronology for the entire Iron Age of Gotland, but a good chunk of it is better than almost anywhere in Scandinavia, thanks to this the wealth of their barriers. So you mentioned sediment. That's a good point. All of this is sitting in the plow soil, and it's been plowed continuously for 1,000 years. So there's absolutely no stratigraphic information at all. It gets churned up every year. Mm-hmm. But that also means that it's really important for us to get out there with the detectors before the pieces fall apart. Particularly the copper alloy stuff is gradually reduced to just a green powder of verdigris. And here's the luxury stuff from the migration period, also 400s, 500s. So there's a gold rod bead top left. There's a piece of a Frankish, another sword pommel top right, directly imported from northern France or southern Belgium. The bottom left is a part of a big silver brooch that some lady has worn under her chin to close her cloak when she's in public outdoors. So it's not the home jewelry that you just keep your dress on with every day, but this is for special occasions. And the design is straight from Bornholm, another one of these rich islands in the Baltic. And it's confusing that all of these things are different scale, but the bottom right fragment is actually from a finger ring, also this very characteristic design. And the fact that the finger ring is just broken into pieces may have to do either with a transaction where they were weighing gold, meaning to pay 2 grams of gold or whatever, or it may be because somebody has been doing gilding. Because when you gild stuff in this period, you grind gold up, mix it with mercury, paint the gold mixed mercury onto the object you want to gild, and then you take a deep breath and you heat it. And then the mercury goes off as a gas into your workspace, and the gold stays on the object. In order to do this, you need to break these things down into smaller bits. My colleague Midjan Gustafsson, in his PhD thesis, he did something really interesting. He took smith's graves, so men who have been buried with smith's tools, which are rare. And then he did a simple thing. He checked what's the level of heavy metal in their bone. Just take a small sample from, I think he took the arm bone. But this would have been systemic all throughout their bodies. And these guys who were buried with ironworking tools had huge levels of mercury and lead in their bone because they were also doing gilding and copper alloy smelting and ending up with, basically like the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Hatters were mad because they were all really badly mercury poisoned. Victorian hat makers used mercury to shape the felt into hats. So that's why the hat is nuts.
That reminds me of the hypothesis about the Romans, Roman Empire sort of dying off, at least in part because of the lead in the glass that they're, drinking from the glass.
Their water
pipes.
piping.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me, the one in the bottom right, then, like you say, yeah, scale is a little bit different or, challenging to see here. Like, to me, that looks like a piece of like a decorative piece of like wainscoting or something on, an architectural detail. But I'm just sort of curious, when you find a little tiny piece like that, is the conclusion that it's a piece of a ring based on just kind of other pieces, I guess, that we already have that maybe look similar that are that, or so what, but what leads you to that conclusion when you just have just a tiny little fragment like this?
People's creativity is limited. Every age has its own quite limited repertoire of designs. So if you've been working with a period for a while, you start recognizing stuff. It's not like everybody's a creative genius who makes something completely unique. If you do, your contemporaries will usually just see you as a crazy person, someone who cannot make an acceptable object. So it's hard to be an innovator. You need to make something that is similar enough that people understand what it is. You can't just come out and get your freak on as a craftsperson.
Right.
Okay.
Picasso would not have done well in this time.
He would not. No. This is fun. These are coins from the 2nd century AD from the Roman Empire. And they're old and worn, and some of them are barely legible anymore. But it seems that these reach Gotland in a huge shipment sometime around 300. We don't quite know why, but looking at the fine combinations in hoards, it seems that some Roman provincial governor has had a basement full of silver bullion in the shape of really worn old denarius coins. And sometime around 300, maybe shortly afterwards, he needs to pay off some barbarians or pay somebody who's done them a favor. So this bullion goes to Gotland and starts circulating in an area that has never had coinage of its own. So they use the old Roman coins as silver to make silver objects, but they also seem to circulate as means of payment, and they continue to do so apparently all the way up to the 536 event. And here at the site in Gotland, we find them strewn across the area, kind of haphazardly, like people have been dropping them. This is not a hoard. This is stuff that we have collected over a huge area, over 3 times 11 people's work.
So they're made of. Go ahead, CJ.
If memory serves, the contact with the Roman Empire for Scandinavians at the time, I believe there's an influence on shipbuilding as well, we think, potentially, with the Celtic skin boats. So it wasn't the Romans who had contact with Scandinavia, as Celts coming from the British Isles and elsewhere. in Europe. So it would so it's not surprising. I just think of because I write books on this, and I one of the things I like to do with the novels is trying to get into the characters' heads of how do they engage with their own history. And I can just imagine the beginning of the Viking Age, for example, and they're getting ready. There's pressures to go trade outside of Scandinavia, and to have somebody who's sitting there in Gotland and they have a bunch of Roman coins going, well, we know that if we go south, they've got these, right? And then they come back with a bunch of Arabic silver coins, right? So it's kind of like this idea that it's like evidence that their ancestors would have got, left, even if that's not true, even if these were imported, that maybe their ancestors left and got, riches from abroad, and then that could inform the culture later on that would then lead to some of the activities that we see in the later, 8th and 9th centuries. I was just thinking out loud that it's kind of interesting to see. They, presumably, maybe these were buried and no one had access to them. But if these were brought in large enough quantities, I can just imagine where contact what would contact with these coins in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, have done to these people. Anyway, just thinking out loud, got the creative juices
Yeah,
flowing.
yeah. It seems like the Scandis were serving in the legions actually, so they were ultimately working for the Romans and ultimately joining barbarian hordes towards the end of the Western Roman Empire, and basically extorting payments from the Romans. And during the Viking period, of course, famously we got the Varangian Guard, which consisted of Scandinavians, and they were um, personal pet army of the East Roman Emperor. So the contacts have been intense throughout the ages.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well known. What did they call it? Federatis, like the Germanic peoples who then became sort of confederated into the Roman army. And then, like you're saying, they extorted, and as the Roman Empire and the imperial seat is sort of getting weaker and weaker, that almost seems like unbeknownst to them, they're just sort of selling off their empire piece by piece to these people who then will, Germanic peoples who will then come in and ultimately take it over at a certain point. So yeah, I mean, in the contact, I mean, I'm Martin, as you know too, like I'm studying a lot of this period right now, and it's really interesting, quite frankly, especially when you're talking about maybe the part of Scandinavia in the south, like in Denmark and maybe southern Sweden or something, that the level of contact, and what the dynamic is like when you live in the frontier zone of a major empire, and the porous nature of that frontier, and trade and mercenary activity, warrior activity, but also just the sort of psychology of war, basically, that happens when you live in the shadow of an empire that has been historically very expensive, and you have to sort of concern yourself with, like, are we next, to get subsumed into that thing. And it just, these frontiers sort of breed this kind of warrior mentality or lifestyle.
We were so close to getting Romanized.
Yeah,
The Battle of the Teutoburger Forest in
yeah,
89.
yeah,
That put paid to a very clear Roman ambition of making the Elbe River their northern frontier.
yeah,
And when they were beaten at Teutoburg, they had to shrug and say, "Okay, let's keep the Rhine as our northern frontier," and that, of course, is quite far from Scandinavia. But if we imagine the Elbe Valley being Romanized, then you're basically in Denmark. It's not far at all, and
yeah,
the Roman influence was strong anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And here
entirely.
you've taken a step across past the 536 event, and we're in the next period that in Sweden we like to call it the Vendel period. The Danes call it the late Germanic Iron Age, and the Norwegians like to call it the Merovingian. So we've got a very neat series of ladies' fashion on the left-hand side here. The oldest groups type at the top, and then they get successively later until the one in the bottom left corner is 8th century. So just a couple of generations before the first Viking raids. And at the scale, it's kind of hard to see, but top right are two round brooches, and there are cast beads, cast copper alloy beads, and at a completely different scale, obviously, to the right is a key, probably used to lock chests of valuables. And those keys seem to have had something to do with elite female identity. That women, elite women in London, Viking period, Scandinavia, and also into the High Middle Ages, they had a particular role of being the one that can open the locked coffers of the household and make decisions of what to do with resources, whereas men were more likely to travel, at least for economic things. But this is quite clearly, all of these objects show that, yep, there are ladies around throughout the London period.
Yeah. Well, and in Swedish history, I mean, is that supposed to be like a somewhat rich period in their history, isn't it? Like similar to what's contemporaneous with like, if some of our listeners will know, like the Sutton Hoo burial in England, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. This is a very rich period, but I got to say, Gotland, this island we're on, is rich in every period up until the Black Death in around 1350. But the reason that Gotland has this amazing heritage today with the town wall around Visby and all the churches, I mean, there's like 100 medieval churches on Gotland, very well preserved. The reason is that they have not done so well since the Black Death. They've basically been in a recession ever since, and they've never had the money to update their medieval church.
Wow.
So they have not been proud of their medieval churches until in modern times, because everybody else could afford to build nice Renaissance or Baroque structures. Not the Gotlanders. They had to make do with their medieval stuff, because the Hanseatic League cut them off around the Black.
Ah. Okay, well, so the Black Death, but then I was going to make just a point of clarification for our audience as well. I mean, some will know, but we keep mentioning the 536 event, quote unquote, and just to be clear, so this is an event that's effectively becomes a climate event due to volcanic eruption. It's believed in this sort of ash cloud that becomes a global thing, but of course, the northern hemisphere, Scandinavia in particular, where it's hard enough to grow things as it is, and then if you get colder and wetter summers, then it's very difficult. And that's what happened as a result of this ash cloud, that we have a blotting out of the sun partially for a number of years, that changes conditions in that part of the world. And I think even like Bo Gresland and Neil Price in their article about this, relating it to like the Fimble winter in Norse mythology, but make an estimate, and others have done so as well, of maybe even upwards of like 50% die off of human beings and plants, animals, things like that. So it's a major event that in some ways there's kind of a reset button that has to get pushed, right?
And it's a very clear start of a new archaeological period where material culture changes after this major hiccup. I mean, this serial pollen curve looks really scary. You can see the amount of land that is under the plow must have dropped really precipitously, particularly in more marginal regions. Whereas in Gotland, I think they did okay because they were incredibly rich to begin with.
Yeah.
But and also any area with a rich fishery can survive better, because marine productivity doesn't go down as badly as if you're a farmer.
Yeah.
And the objects you show here, those are post 1100. So this is what we like to call the Middle Ages in Scandinavia. This is kind of confusing, because in the rest of Europe, the Middle Ages start when the Romans leave, right? In England, it's 409. That's when the Middle Ages start, because the legions have been sent to the Eastern Front. But in Scandinavia, we never had any Romans, as I said. They got beaten up with the Teutoburg Forest. So instead, we reckon The Middle Ages arrived with the monks in 1100, and one thing they bring is this 1200s saint to the left here. It's from a procession crucifix made in the North French town of Limoges. And Limoges had this amazing enamel industry for centuries, where they had secret techniques and recipes to make decorated objects. And apparently somebody has been running around, perhaps on Saints' Days, blessing the crops or something, with a Limoges crucifix at this farmstead. And this suggests that the farmstead is quite rich during the Middle Ages. And it's top right, 126 there, a nice big finger ring that has had a gem of some kind on it, sadly lost. And bottom right, number 19 there, the little square cross decoration is from a belt that men would wear. We got really good parallels for several sites, including Finnish graves, because the Finns are a wise people. They did not quit putting stuff into their graves. They continued on up until like 1300 or something, which we can only dream of in Sweden. This means that we know quite a lot about the material culture of Finns at the period that we don't know in Sweden. But one of the objects here that is really interesting, it doesn't look like much, is this kind of grayish, whitish thing, numbered 139, I believe. Mm-hmm. That's a lead seal from an imported bale of textiles from Flanders. So this is a typical Hanseatic League material culture, when you can buy enormous distances, buy industrial products, commodities, and these lead seals, if you're lucky, they're so well preserved that you can actually see what town in Flanders has produced the textile.
Wow. Yeah, I wanted to end on this slide just because of the humanoid figure.
Yeah, isn't it great?
Yeah.
You can maybe, if you zoom in, you can see the little hand that the saint is holding over his or her heart on his or her left hand side. I think this is supposed to be a dude. It's kind of hard to tell with religious figures because they're all wearing dresses. But yeah, a gesture of benediction over his heart.
Man, okay, so this is really excellent. I mean, it's kind of crazy you're talking about you didn't have the stratigraphy of the soil, but you certainly do of the objects. My God, what's the coverage of the period of time? You're talking about the Bronze Age, which you're dating to what?
Yeah, I mean, the oldest thing we've got is from like 2000 BC. That's the copper axe. And then there aren't many finds until around 150. But since 150 AD, this farmstead or hamlet has been there, and people have been dropping stuff ever since. And the great explosion of stuff is around 500, when they've got this weird neck ring thing going on, where they're breaking them apart and throwing them on ritual fires, but not melting them down, just sort of messing them up. But not worse than that we can recognize the necklace. Then they go back to some sort of normalcy again after the 536 event, and they just continue being a fairly well-off farmstead that is still there and still tilling the same fields. So yeah, continuity.
You know, it's funny when you first introduced that slide, the last one with the religious figure on it, and Martin, you were talking about the 536 event and how the material culture changed after that. And I didn't know that we were leaping into the 1100s. And I looked, and my first thought was, yes, that figure does look quite skeleton-like. That's a striking material culture change. But no, it was actually from the 1100s. I was like, oh, well, okay, well all right, never mind. I'm just gonna. My goodness.
All of this stuff is in the same plow soil. So when we get it out of the soil, we have no hint how old this thing is. A lot of the time, it's pull tabs from aluminum beer cans, because a metal detector cannot tell you if a piece is silver or aluminum. So you got to get out all the pull tabs out of the field to find one silver coin. So you're just left with this enormous salad of mixed period, which is great fun. But of course, you need to be a small science nerd to make any sense of it at all. Otherwise, you'll end up with lots of very odd stuff.
How deep does the plowing go, and then is there a layer below that that you could find stuff in?
Very good question. Few farmers plow below 20 centimeters, so 2/3 of a foot. But whether there's a preserved culture layer on it, we do not know yet. Me and my colleague Per at the museum in Lisby that owns the project and the permit, we hope to take a small digger there and remove some of the plow soil, and maybe we can find the post holes of the building that people lived in. And post holes are great because they have to be deep, otherwise your house will fall over. And this means that stuff that ends up in a post hole basically never leaves. It sits in the post hole until somebody comes with a mechanical excavator. And then we can get soil samples to check out plant macrofossils, bones. We can get radiocarbon dates, all kinds of interesting stuff. And also, if we do geophysics, then we can get an idea of what the architecture of these houses were like without even digging.
As far as the layout goes, you mean just?
Yeah. I mean, these
Yeah.
people are very conscious of architectural planning. They do not build haphazard houses. They have measuring rods and the same kind of fashion thing that goes into their jewelry design goes into their house designs. So there are typologies of postmodern building plans all over Scandinavia.
So you mentioned like the draconian, I guess, regulations or laws or something regarding detectoring in Sweden. I mean, CJ, don't they have similar draconian restrictions in France as well?
Yeah, it's illegal. I think we talked to Leszek Gardella too, which is it's same in Poland. I think in France, it's not because they want to save things that are buried underground. It's that digging up artifacts from the past is the profession of an archaeologist, and they only want archaeologists doing that work. So it's more of a bureaucratic, red tape sort of thing, rather versus what you had mentioned earlier in Gotland, which is to protect the hoards. Because in France, they're like, we don't know what's there. We just don't want you digging it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that archaeologists are never going to put in all this work. It is extremely time consuming. Nobody's going to pay them to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's expensive.
The typical salary of a European archaeologist comes from the National Road Authority. And most legislation does not protect what's in the plow soil. And so up until very recently, you would just machine off the plow soil without even trying the metal detectors. We don't know what was in the plow soil. And then you would get at the post holes and the hearts and the graves and whatever. But increasingly, colleagues in that business have realized that, okay, all the interesting finds are actually in the plow soil, because when you plow out somebody's former house, they haven't buried their stuff. They just dropped it on top of the soil. So when you start plowing, it goes up into the plow soil, and it still stays there. So I believe the country that has not perfect, but definitely the best legislation is Denmark, where they got a national website where you can have an app on your phone, and when you make the metal detector find in Denmark, you can immediately send a pic up to their national registry, where a bunch of nerds, including myself, will classify things, and then you will hand it in, possibly for a reward. But anyway, the fine belongs to the state, not to you or to the landowner.
Yeah, then if you're like England, you take it one step further and have the portable antiquities scheme where you can just create this giant database where everybody can go and look at
Yeah,
what.
it's the same way of thinking. But in England, we have a serious problem that I think colleagues there will agree that if I find a single copper or alloy object in England, I can just keep it and put it up on eBay that same night without
Yeah.
telling anybody. That's legal. But the most informative finds are not your gold hoards or your silver hoards. The most informative finds about how people lived in the past is the copper alloy.
Hmm.
I mean, that actually is making me think of, I guess the question of like, how does Sweden view these objects? So I mean, again, kind of having some background in museum work and stuff. I mean, people like that, us, me, whatever, we have a sort of, I don't know. It's more than just an academic interest in these things. I mean, it's kind of it's cool and it's interesting, and this is part of our cultural heritage, and tells us about what people were doing, or maybe whatever, living in this particular area that we now call home, wherever that happens to be. But that it only means something to us, right? And so, and actually, you know what, CJ, I was talking to my students about this because of the heist of the jewels at the Louvre. And I was asking my students, like, how does they had just read an article about, sort of that Guy Halsall wrote, and I've mentioned before on the podcast about the cultural differences between the Christians and the non-Christians back at the time. And like, okay, Vikings are non-Christian, they're stealing these Christian things, but they don't care, like, because culturally it's not part of their culture. So those objects have a different meaning for them, right? They're just to be monetized and whatever. And it's sort of like, so I asked my students, like, how do you think this heist from the Louvre seems similar to a Viking raid? And so they were like, oh, well, they got in and out really fast, and then this whole issue of like, yeah, well, these things mean something in the minds of somebody who's French because it's part of their cultural heritage. But otherwise, to other people, maybe it's nothing. It's just jewels meant to be monetized, right? And so I don't know, just
But
all of this.
French people are known to guillotine those who wear that sort of jewelry. So I think their
Yeah,
ideas about them should be
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
iffy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just sort of it's swirling around in my brain. I'm probably not articulating very well. Is just this whole idea of like cultural heritage, and I mean, because I can imagine there's some people who are like, well, who gives a shit? This is just a bunch of metal stuff you dug out of the ground. Like, yeah, so interesting, but otherwise, you know. But other people are like, no, wait, this is like really important about our human story and all that. So like,
Most people just want to watch America's Top Model, so we can't put the bar at that level. I mean,
oh,
our parliaments have put these laws in place that allow us to protect stuff. So apparently, at least members of parliament at some point cared, and I think it's kind of I like to say that it's part of how a Western country constructs their own idea of their own civilization. I mean, if I were an economic advisor in Liberia, I would not suggest that they would put money primarily into protecting their archaeological sites. I'd maybe say maybe you should put your money into schools and healthcare. But Sweden can afford it, definitely.
So what do they call that? Luxury beliefs. Like you're
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
you're a wealthy enough country to be concerned about little bits of metal that come out of the ground and be spending money on preserving them, etc.
Yeah, yeah. It's not going to put food on the table for anybody really, but it's really fun. And a lot of people think it's really, really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same with any humanities or any historical science. Like paleontology, we don't really know, and nobody has a practical need for understanding all the various species of trilobite. But it's super interesting. It's
Yeah.
super fun. Everybody loves trilobites and dinosaurs. Why not put money into that when we can? But as I
Yeah.
said, if you're a super poor country, maybe you have other priorities.
Mm.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
I've said that to me. Go ahead, CJ.
just to say something on the French jewels,
Yeah.
and speaking of of a country's wealth, those jewels that were stolen. It was a crown and a necklace, and just a couple of things, trinkets that once belonged to some obscure queens and princesses back in the day. If you've ever been to the Louvre, those displays go on for days. I mean, it's like the thieves went in, you know, come in, come out, and then everybody's like, how on earth could they possibly, be allowed to do that? It's an outrage. And it's like, have you been there? Like, it's really. It's like that's nothing. It's absolute. I mean, it's they're not going to use it to pay down their debt. I mean, so so it's one of those things where it's like think of what a luxury that is to where they can lose $100 million of jewels and be like, eh. We have much more. If you go, I mean, you go into the Louvre. This is the thing in the Louvre that really that gets me is you go into that one entrance area that kind of goes up into the main palace, and there's like a little stair that goes around, and the walls and the banister and everything is gold leafed, and they explain to you how much gold is in there, just on the walls, and it's thin. I mean, if you try to go in there and steal the gold, you'd have to like scrape like somebody taking off wallpaper for days and days and days. That'd be slow work, but with the price of gold now, that might be kind of worth it. But it's but the amount of gold that's in the Louvre is it's mind-boggling, and I don't know.
Wow.
It's so again, it's just one of those luxuries of look at this history we have.
Well, and at least like the jewels were, French, right? Have made for or whatever, worn by a French empress. I mean, how many? We can get into the whole other discussion of the luxury of things like museums existing in the first place that are largely made up of stuff that's appropriated from other places that, maybe doesn't really belong in that museum. So that's a whole other discussion. I mean, similar. I mean, it's kind of related, I mean, it's like, what do we do with these objects that are, sort of the cumulative sort of creative output or otherwise of humanity, who owns history, I guess is the question.
Not to throw this back into at Martin, but I just thought of something funny. I mean, this is a Napoleon joke, but it's basically Napoleon going to Egypt and being like, you know what, you should spend your money on the children and the schools and we will take the archaeological things back to France for you, huh? You
Or the British with the Elgin marbles.
Yeah.
We will take them and protect them, and Greece will never see them again.
but something that people do not understand about the Elgin marbles is how extremely few archaeologists ever need to see the Elgin marbles live. There are like 2 people on this planet who have a professional reason to look at and touch Elgin marbles. It's completely useless for any archaeological purpose. They are unique, and they represent one Greek town. So the reason that everybody's fighting over them is just Greek nationalism, nothing having to do with science. And the same with these jewels stolen from the Louvre. I'm sorry that they were stolen. That's quite sad, but I'm not aware of any issue in history or art history or science that can be solved by means of studying those, I think it's 19th century jewels. They're just like art objects, and then they're not interesting to me as an archaeologist, even though I've worked with the archaeology of the 19th century. Like, I hope they find them and get them back, but you're not going to see anybody writing much about them from a scholarly perspective. They're just kind of sitting there, like the gold leaf on the banister.
Mm-hmm. So I do have one final question. I think we'll make it since we're getting near the end of our time here. I was at a museum actually yesterday, because France is full of these things. And while walking around, I had a thought about the future, because we are living through interesting times. And it appears that the world order that we thought was so stable and took for granted is not so stable and probably shouldn't have been taken for granted. And it's just kind of a nice reminder of the idea that human civilizations cycle through, right? It's kind of like the rock on the mantle of the earth. It just eventually all just and then kind of recycles itself, right? And so I was thinking about what will people in the future think of us because we thought that we were so stable and so advanced and then dug up all these things for our own benefit that they will never be able to dig up in the future, right? So we're taking it away from future generations, and it's very likely we won't be able to guarantee that we can keep these things nice and preserved and pretty for all that long. I mean, the ground preserved them well. We've exposed all this stuff to air now and might go. So what, as an archaeologist, what are your thoughts on like the future, how we will be viewed in the future for our leanings today, digging all this stuff out of the ground for our benefit?
Yeah, well, some things do not preserve very well. So, for instance, anything that's in the plow soil gets just ground up. So they will be thankful to us for doing that.
Mm.
As for other things, well, same with anything organic that you bury. I would be super happy if somebody during the Bronze Age had excavated Bronze Age graves and given me some documentation of them. But I guess when people 2,000 years from now study 2025, they're not going to be super interested in what archaeologists and historians were doing. They are going to ask questions about why could these people not find a system of government that allowed them to solve their most important problems, because they had the technology to solve the most important problems, but they couldn't agree on a system of government or an economic system that allowed anybody to take any useful action. And of course, the people saying this, they will be sitting 50 meters above today's sea level, because anything under that level will be just inundated.
Woo, that's a good. No, that's not a good way to end, but that's a good way to end if we want to like segue into another very thoughtful podcast at some point with Martin. The purpose of life. What is the purpose?
Yeah. Well, ask the trilobites. They knew how to party.
Yeah.
And they all ended up extinct.
Yeah.
Go out with a bang and not a whimper. That's what they say.
Yeah, better burn out and fade away.
Party like it's 1999.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, yeah, the lesson we get from them is, well, they lived and then they're not here anymore. So, enjoy the time you have.
That's exactly what's going to happen to us.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. It's all right. I'm good with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to freak out our listeners or anything, but I saw this cool thing about how just the what we can see from the modeling of like the future of the universe, right? And eventually all the stars are going to die out and all that's going to be left is black holes. And they basically took a 1-year calendar and said, we live in the 2 days at the beginning of the calendar year where there's light.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the universe will persist in total darkness for the next 363 days. It's like, whoa, yeah. So we're just here. We're just a little. It's like the flash on your camera. That's it. That's us.
And what we're living through now since the start of industrialization is an explosion in slow motion. So we should think of just splinters flying everywhere, and we're flying everywhere, and we're just looking at it at the wrong time scale. But about black holes, my friend who speaks Russian told me that the Russian term for a black hole, the astronomical thing, is a frozen star, because the term black hole was already occupied in Russian and means a piece of anatomy, so they couldn't use it for the star.
Black hole trademark.
Yep.
Yeah. But that makes sense, a frozen star, because then the whole point is it's so dense that light can't escape, but it's also singularity. So it's the beginning and the end of time. So it's just frozen. There's no time. It's Yeah, I like that. I like that. Except for the
that's
Hawking.
that's exactly where all the finds we secured from the site back in April are going to end up in some black hole eventually.
Yeah.
Right.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Well, with that.
Yeah, with that, thanks a lot for coming back.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, beautiful stuff. So and again, we'll post the field report so people can take a look at the rest of it.
They'll probably need to use Google Translate. Other brands are available because it's in Sweden.
Right. But yeah, we have the means, right? AI can do it for you.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for letting me come on again. It's great.
Yeah.
Always
Yeah.
nice to talk to people who are so knowledgeable and interested. Thank you.
Yeah.